Around 11 months ago, I completely switched up my opening repertoire, most notably swapping out my beloved London system for the Catalan. In doing so, I've truly understood the value in knowing multiple openings. Not only are you much more unpredictable as a player, but openings often transpose into one another. This can help you find familiarity in otherwise tricky positions. But I wasn't just satisfied with learning a couple of extra openings, so welcome to my series where I study an opening so you don't have to. In today's video, we'll be looking at the Sicilian defense. We'll go through all of the necessary lines, and at the end of the video, we'll rate it on 3 main categories. Those categories are effectiveness, entertainment value, and theoretical difficulty. If you'd like to get a better understanding of how I studied this opening, feel free to check out the video at the top of the description where I explain my entire study plan. Also, make sure you leave a comment on which opening you'd like to see next. Whichever comment has the most likes is the one that I'll study in the next episode. Before we do get into today's video though, if you guys like my content and want to help support my channel, feel free to book a coaching lesson on my new website. You guys can get tailored coaching specialized for your own playstyle, with new students getting 25% off their first lesson using code FIRST at checkout. Also, thanks to ChessMind.ai, you guys can get the entire course for every opening line in this video 100% free. There is quite literally no paywalls on this course. All you have to do is go to ChessMind.ai, make an account, and look at the course yourself. All of the links to ChessMind.ai are in the description below, and you guys will have full access to the course. ChessMind has plenty of other courses on their website too, and a lot of AI integrations that you guys can check out by clicking the link in the description. But with that being said, let's take a look at one of the most feared openings in all of chess: the Sicilian defense. Let's quickly cover exactly how you can get into the Sicilian defense by expanding the board to fill the screen and looking at the moves together. The Sicilian defense can only be played by the black pieces after the move e4, to which we respond with c5. Already, white has over 10 variations they can play into. For the purposes of this video, on move 2, we will only look at variations played in over 1% of games on Lichess, meaning several variations like the Snyder or Lasker Dunn will be omitted from this video. However, we will be looking at the McDonnell Attack, Mengarini Variation, Alapin Sicilian, Smith-Morra Gambit, Closed Sicilian, Fianchetto Variation, Prix Attack, Kramnik Variation, French Sicilian, and all Khan Sicilian lines. This repertoire was built to minimize theory whilst also avoiding disadvantageous lines like the Maroczy bind. I also gravitated towards the Khan Sicilian because I'm more familiar with e6 structures like in the Caro-Kann. Enough context though, if you guys want to follow along, you can look at the ChessMind.ai link in the description, or you can check out the Lichess study link, which is also in the description as well. But let's start by looking at the McDonnell Attack with 2 f4, 3 e5, 5 bishop e2, and 7 d3. The McDonnell Attack occurs in around 5% of games on Lichess. It's quite dynamic, but with competent play, black should have favorable position. After 1 c5 from black, white plays 2 f4, weakening their kingside and already allowing black to theoretically equalize. We strike centrally with d5, asking questions of white's central structure. Let's look at white's most common move of e5, which is not the best response, but one we should study regardless. We'll of course come back and look at other options from white here later though. e5 may take space in the black position, but it surrenders central control to black, whilst passing the turn simultaneously. Sometimes in chess, the best way to punish a bad move is to just develop a piece. So here, we play knight c6. Knight f3 is played in almost every game from this position. We want to pin the knight to the queen with bishop g4. There are alternatives to bishop g4, but the theory is a lot easier to digest if we play it this way. It's also a very theoretically strong choice. Bishop e2 is the most common defense, which is a poor defense, but again, we'll come back and look at stronger responses. If you'd like to see some more in-depth information about these variations, the Lichess study in the description also has notations, but to save time in this video, we may not include every single piece of information. We simply play e6 here ourselves to open up our dark squared bishop, whilst also giving our undeveloped knight some more squares. In most games, white will castle here, and we should follow up with knight ge7, which is interchangeable with knight h6. The idea is we want to wrap our knight around to f5. This will be the case in all McDonnell Attack variations where bishop e2 is played on move 5. 7 d3 is a decent response here from white, which is also a move we'll come back to as there are some other common responses too. In this case, however, we continue with our plan and play knight f5, completing our knight's development. Knight e1 is an interesting move from white, as black can play h5 and sacrifice their pawn. After bishop takes g4, h takes g4, and queen takes g4, black will play c4, opening up white's weak dark square diagonal. If d takes c4, we play bishop c5 check, and black is winning by negative 4.6 on evaluation. After king h1, rook h4, queen h5, and knight cd4, the queen can no longer stop knight g3 check, which will lead to checkmate. However, instead of 8 knight e1, the more common move is c3 from white, which occurs in around 60% of games from this position. We respond with h5 anyway, inviting the move h3 from black, which will most likely be played on the next move. Fishing ball traps are not so sound in this position, so we break the tension and take on f3. White will play bishop takes f3 in response, to which we simply develop our final piece with bishop e7. White importantly cannot take on h5 because of knight g3 forking the rook and the bishop, so they should play knight a3, to which we respond with bishop h4 and chase after white's dark squares surrounding its king. This position is a little tricky to play, but black is positionally much better, as we have a better knight than their bishop, and we have greater central control and better piece coordination. The McDonnell Attack: 2 f4, 3 e5, 5 bishop e2, and 7 c3. If we go back 4 moves though, white did not need to play d3 and could have instead played c3. This makes more sense, as c3 potentially supports d4 from white, so how do we approach this? Well, we first continue with the same move, knight f5. Knight f5 realistically stops d4 from ever being possible, as the square is defended too many times by black. If knight a3, d3, or h3, this line will transpose into the previous line with 7d3. However, if white has been watching their jacksark videos, which according to Lichess is literally 1% of players, they may find the best continuation of knight e1. Here we play bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, and c4, opening up the dark square diagonal. If d4 now, c takes d4 en passant can be played, however, after white's knight takes d3, our bishop cannot develop to the c5 square. This is not a problem, as our queen can slide into b6 with a check, forcing the king to shuffle over to h1. Black has great attacking continuations here, beginning with h5. The idea is that we want to play h4 and knight g3 check with checkmating ideas. This position has not been reached on Lichess ever though, so I won't go any further. The McDonnell Attack: 2 f4, 3 e5, 5 bishop b5, 6 bishop takes c6 check, and 8 d3. So now we've looked at variations of the McDonnell Attack with 5 bishop e2, but what if they played bishop b5 instead? This is slightly better for white, but we can still punish the move regardless. Queen b6 develops our queen early with an attack on the bishop. If white takes our knight, we recapture with the queen, allowing them to castle short. We continue in thematic fashion with e6, opening up the bishop and knight to develop further, whilst white responds with d3. Again, we'll come back to this and explain what to do if white should play c3 instead. But with d3 on the board, we mirror the previous variation with knight e7, aiming to reroute to f5. In this variation, as white has traded off their light squared bishop, they'll want to deal with the pinned knight on f3 much sooner, and in 30% of games, they'll play h3. Again, h5 won't work here, so we just play bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, and knight f5, activating our knight to its optimal square. Really, there's nothing much to explain in this variation. There's no tactical ideas really, as white has opted to trade down early to avoid complications. This should be positionally better for black though, as white has a bad bishop and no central control. So this position will still be won by the player with better endgame skills, rather than the most theoretical player. The McDonnell Attack: 2 f4, 3 e5, 5 bishop b5, 6 bishop takes c6 check, and 8 c3. Like the last variation, we must look back to move 8, where white also had the opportunity to play c3. How should we respond? Well, because c3 is a slow, long-term move which does not immediately help their position, now we can afford to use the fishing pole tactics and play h5. If white plays d4, we just play c takes d4, and knight h6. And we play on white's weaknesses in this position, which is mainly their d4 pawn. We will drop the knight on f5 to exploit this while threatening to trade off its primary defender on f3. If instead of c takes d4 on the recapture, if they play knight takes d4, we play bishop takes d1, knight takes c6, bishop e2, rook f2, b takes c6, and rook takes e2. We won't be up material, but we have clear positional advantages and a negative 0.7 position. White has a bad bishop to our good bishop. Black has better central control and a much better pawn structure with more useful open files. However, white does not need to play d4 and can instead play h3, kicking our bishop away. However, here we can play the brilliant knight h6, sacrificing our bishop, intending to attack the white king early. If h takes g4, and knight g5 for example, we play c4, opening up the weak dark squares and preparing bishop c5 check, which will lead to a feast on the white king. The McDonnell Attack with 2 f4, 3 e5, 5 bishop b5, and 6 knight c3. We said we'd come back to variations where white doesn't take our knight on c6 on move 6. So what if they play knight c3 instead? Well, this walks into immediate danger, as d4 can now be played. In 60% of games, white realizes they've made a mistake and plays bishop takes c6 check, queen takes c6, and knight b1. This allows bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, queen takes f3, g takes f3, g3, c takes d3, and rook d8. This is a dominant dominating endgame position that black should easily win. It's also worth noting that if white plays knight to d5 on move 7, instead of panicking and taking on b5, we just play queen d8, as queen takes b5 would result in knight c7 check, losing our queen. The knight on d5 can be trapped with e6 here. The McDonnell attack with 2 f4, 3 e takes d5, and 4 bishop b5 check. With that being said, we've covered most variations including 3 e5, so now let's look at a more solid approach from white with 3 e takes d5 instead. Taking centrally with our queen would allow black to develop with tempo, so let's stall the recapture with knight f6. We'll look at a few individual responses on move 4, but first, let's look at bishop b5 check. Here we play bishop d7, blocking the check whilst attacking the undefended bishop. After bishop takes d7 check, which is played in almost all games, we capture with the queen. c4 is played in almost all games in this position, defending the central d5 pawn. Here though, we play e6, offering to gambit the pawn whilst threatening to undermine the central structure if it's not accepted. Queen e2 is a common response, but falls to bishop d6, d takes e6, and f takes e6, as white has virtually no development and several weaknesses. So instead of queen e2, white will probably play d takes e6, immediately allowing queen takes e6 check, queen e2, queen takes e2, knight takes e2, and knight c6. After white castles short, black castles long, and although we are down a pawn, black wins these positions in almost 70% of games as white simply has too many weaknesses and too little development. The McDonnell attack with 2 f4, 3 e takes d5, and 4 c4. Instead of 4 bishop b5 check though, white can skip that move and immediately play c4. However, this is a subpar variation for white as this allows e6 to come faster. This time, black can recapture with the light square bishop after d takes e6. In response, white will play knight f3, to which we just continue developing with knight c6. After knight c3, we don't rush castling, but play g6 in order to activate our final piece. After bishop e2, we play bishop g7. After white castles, we castle short as well, and although we're down a pawn, this position is clearly advantageous for black positionally, and we will at least win a pawn back. There's not too much more to say about this position though, as it's so similar to the last, so let's move on to a different response from white on move 4. The McDonnell attack, 2 f4, 3 e takes d5, and 4 knight c3. Very quickly, if 4 knight f3 is played by white, after 3 knight f6 by black, we play knight takes d5, and it will transpose into the main move we'll look at, which is knight takes c3. If you want to see for yourself, this is chapter 8 and 9 of the Lichess study. So let's look at 4 knight c3, which we respond to by playing knight takes d5. White has 3 options here. The first is to play knight f3, which is what 4 knight f3 transposes into. We'll respond simply with e6, and although white has a lot of potential moves here on move 6, they all kind of merge into one another regardless and don't require individual defensive concepts. So after bishop b5 check, we play bishop d7, protecting our king. After bishop takes d7 check, which is played in 60% of games, we recapture with our knight. To follow, black will capture our knight on d5, and we're forced to recapture with the e-pawn. Short castles will follow for white, to which we simply reply with bishop e7, preparing to castle ourselves. Black is better in this position, as we're more developed and control the center. On move 5 though, instead of knight f3, they could play bishop b5 check. In this case, we will play bishop d7, bishop takes d7 check, and importantly, we need to play queen takes d7 now to protect our knight on the following turn. Again, on move 5, there is a third option for white, which is to capture our knight centrally with knight takes d5. Here, we play queen takes d5, knight f3, and the simple g6. To suggest you need more theory here is misleading, as black is doing very well and white has no tricks. They have not justified their opening whatsoever, and you can get away with playing natural intuitive moves to increase your advantage, whilst white still needs to play carefully. The McDonnell attack, 2 f4, 3 knight f3, and 4 knight g5. So with that variation coming to a close, we can trek all the way back to move 3 to explore another option from white, 3 knight f3. Whilst theoretically this is a less solid approach than 3 e takes d5, it's also just more unintuitive for white to play. We obviously just want to snap up the free pawn here, resulting in one of 2 moves for white. Let's first explore knight g5, which gives black an evaluation of -0.9. We follow with bishop f5 here, defending said pawn. It's important to note that after g4 from white, we play bishop d7, and after knight takes e4, we simply play knight f6, offering the trade. We're happy with this, as after knight takes f6, white has destroyed their kingside structure for 0 positional or material gain. So instead, on move 5, white should play bishop c4, forcing us to defend the checkmate with the natural e6. Knight c3 is a common follow-up here, attacking the weak e4 pawn once again, so we defend it with knight f6. After queen e2, adding another attacker, we do not bother to defend the pawn, but play knight c6, developing another piece. If knight g takes e4, we play knight d4, hitting the queen and the c7 forking square. After queen d3, a6 is a fine follow-up, freezing the white position entirely. The McDonnell attack with 2 f4, 3 knight f3, 4 knight e5, and 5 bishop c4. Instead of 4 knight g5 though, white should play knight e5 instead, allowing future threats of bishop c4 without putting their knight on an awkward square. Here we play g6, preparing to fianchetto our bishop. After bishop c4, we play knight h6, defending the checkmate whilst developing a piece. e6 is also a viable move here. After knight c3, attacking the pawn, I recommend the move f6, which should be followed by bishop b5 check. Knight d7, knight takes d7, bishop takes d7, bishop takes d7 check, queen takes d7, knight takes e4, and bishop g7, liquidating into a favourable endgame for black in which we are more developed and have a better structure. The McDonnell attack with 2 f4, 3 knight f3, 4 knight e5, and 5 bishop b5 check. This is not the end of our 4 knight e5 endeavours though, as on move 5, white can play bishop b5 check instead of bishop c4, trying to trick us with a different move order. In response, we play knight d7, and if they trade down on d7, we're entering a similar endgame as before, but with a much better structure. Instead, on move 6, white will play knight c3, allowing us knight f6 to defend the pawn. Black will hold on to this central pawn for a lot longer in this variation, and in a lot of cases, white will not be able to win it back. The McDonnell attack with 2 f4, 3 knight c3, and 4 knight c e2. So with all that being said, it should be quite clear that variations with 3 knight f3 are not optimal for white. But what about knight c3 instead? Unlike previous variations, d4 can now be met with knight ce2 instead of knight b1. So let's explore this line first before coming back to alternate lines on move 4 for white. We play queen a5 here, which hilariously has a 70% win rate for the black side. White commonly plays knight f3, which we respond by playing knight f6, attacking the loose pawn. If e5, knight d5 is slowly setting up a queen trap because after something like g3, bishop f5, and bishop g2, we have knight e3 trapping the queen. If they find b4, we play queen takes b4, c3, and knight takes g2, picking up the bishop. After king f2, we play d takes c3, king takes g2, and c2, and we clearly have a much better position. However, instead of e5, white should play knight g3, which we respond with h5, pushing the pawn up the board to harass the knight. White must play h4 in response to stop this, and we simply reply with knight c6. White has weak light squares on the king side, and black has a very strong center. In some cases, you can imagine black's flexibility in castling both ways. Not to mention, we have a negative 0.7 advantage here. The McDonnell attack with 2 f4, 3 knight c3, and 4 bishop b5 check. But like we said on move 4, white is not forced to play knight ce2 and could instead play bishop b5 check. After bishop d7, because 2 pieces are now hanging, white must play bishop takes d7 check, queen takes d7, and knight ce2. This variation is the same as the last, however there are no light squared bishops. We want d3 here, stunting the development of white's dark squared bishop, whilst fracturing their structure. After c takes d3 and queen takes d3, white most commonly plays e5 to defend their pawn, to which we respond with e6. Our moves from this point onwards are all intuitive, with moves like knight c6 and knight ge7 to come. The McDonnell attack with 2 f4, 3 bishop b5 check, and 5 d3. So, like 3 knight f3, we've established knight c3 is not great for white either. But what about accelerating the move order by playing bishop e5 check on move 3 instead? Well, here we play bishop d7 to block the check. In 90% of games, white will trade on d7 and allow us to recapture with our queen. Here on move 5, white has multiple options which we'll come back to, but let's look at d3 first. Here we play knight c6, knight f3, and the only real move to make this interesting, which is long castles. At this point, because of the imbalance of castling long, players on Lichess don't have any idea what the theory should be and start playing a plethora of random moves. So just play this position to the best of your ability and forget about theory here. If you don't like castling long, you don't have to either. e6 is a fine replacement if you want to play a more thematic and less imbalanced game. The McDonnell attack, 2 f4, 3 bishop b5 check, 5 e5, and also 5 e takes d5, 2 variations that we don't need to cover really. 5 e5 in this variation is responded to by playing knight c6, which vaguely transposes into chapters 1 through 6 on the Lichess study, and 5 e takes d5 is also covered in chapter 7 of the study and is a direct transposition, so we'll skip this response as well. However, knight c3 on the 5th move has not been covered yet, and leads to a very strong position after d takes e4, knight takes e4, and knight f6. After knight takes f6 and e takes f6, black has a very strong position as white has no activity and has a very flaccid pawn structure. If white continues with knight f3, we play knight c6, and we can castle long here to punish a very inactive white position. White cannot match us and castle long too, as it would take too long, so we can immediately start throwing our pawns up the board and go on the attack. The McDonnell attack with 2f4, 3d3, and 4e5. We're finally close to wrapping up all the McDonnell attack theory, but we need to look at 3d3 as a response from white. We respond to d3 with knight c6, which allows a few moves. Let's look at the most common move, e5. Here we play knight h6, and luckily for us, we've already explored these positions on the Lichess study in chapters 1 through to 6. The only difference is the knight is on h6. However, we did say in those first few chapters, knight h6 and knight ge7 were interchangeable, and didn't affect the outcome of the position, as the knight will eventually travel to f5 anyway. The McDonnell attack with 2f4, 3d3, and 4 knight f3. Finally, we can look at the last variation of the McDonnell with 4 knight f3 for white. We respond with d takes e4, d takes e4, queen takes d1 check, king takes d1, and knight f6. This position may be a little boring, but I really couldn't find a way to make this position interesting without giving white some real play. After knight c3, we play bishop g4, bishop e2, long castles check, and bishop d2. The most imbalance I could find was castling long and trying to target some pinned pieces. Luckily, 3d3 is only played in around 2% of games on Lichess, so you'll barely ever face it, but it is a quite boring line to go down. The Mengarini Variation with 2a3, 3b4, 4 knight c3, 5g3, and 6b5. The Mengarini Variation is not a common opening for the white side. However, if you aren't familiar with its theory, the likelihood is you'll lose every game you play against it, hence its inclusion in this video. It starts with e4 and c5, followed by the peculiar looking a3 on move 2. The intention from white is to play b4, undermining black's center to later push for d4. However, this is a flawed plan. Let's explore why black should have better positions. After a3, we want to play g6. If white wants to play b4, we are now prepared to play bishop g7 and take control of their newly weakened long diagonal. White can block this attack in one of two ways. Let's explore the first and most common option of knight c3, which blocks the attack by developing the knight. It may be tempting to play c takes b4 here, but that's exactly what white wants because they plan on playing d4. Instead, we play d6, reinforcing the pawn whilst opening up the light-squared bishop. There are many continuations for white here. We'll come back and explore more later, but first, let's begin by looking at 5g3. White looks to Fianchetto their bishop. However, this is a slow move. We follow up with knight c6 here. White has two main options, b5 and rook b1. Let's look at b5 first. b5 affords a -1 advantage as we have knight d4 hopping our knight into the position uncontested. In this position, if white plays rook b1, we play knight f6. Bishop g7, we play bishop g4, and white will have to compromise their pawn structure with f3 to relieve the pressure. This is a positionally crushing game for black here, as white has a weakness on b5, scrambled pieces, and no clear way of castling. If instead of 7 rook b1 they play bishop g2, this is worse, as we have knight takes b5 as the knight on c3 is pinned to the rook by the bishop. The Mengarini Variation with 2a3, 3b4, 4 knight c3, 5g3, and 6 rook b1. On move 6 though, instead of b5, what if white just plays rook b1? This way, the b5 pawn is not going to become a target, and it seems white is improving their move order. This is a better variation for white. However, we just play knight f6, and after bishop g2, we play bishop g4 again. White will have to play f3, compromising their pawn structure. Bishop f3 would stunt the development of their knight after queen d7 in response by black. If they instead play knight f3 to block the attack, it would result in c takes b4, a takes b4, and knight d4, putting pressure on the pinned piece. If h3, we play bishop takes f3, and rook c8, and we shift the focus onto the weak c2 pawn, which the knight is currently pinned to. After a move like castles, we can play knight d7, and not only has our bishop opened up, but we have new squares for our knight too. The Mengarini Variation with 2a3, 3b4, 4 knight c3, and 5 rook b1. So, if it seems like the Fianchetto structure causes problems for white, what if they skip that idea entirely and play 5 rook b1 instead? Well, here we play knight c6 instead, as we're trying to avoid bishop b5 coming with a check, as if white intends on trading the bishop off, they have now not wasted a move with g3 justifying the trade. If they play 6b5, we transpose to chapter 22 of the Lichess study, and if 6g3, we transpose to chapter 22. However, white can play bishop b5 as the knight is pinned. We respond naturally with bishop d7 here to break the pin. If white continues with knight f3, we play a6, welcoming the trade as a bishop would actually sit pretty happily on c6. After bishop takes c6, and castles, we can play b5 ourselves, taking up space on the queen side. This position is not terrible for white, but black has clear advantages, and as long as we play logical moves and don't let white catch up in development, we'll have great positions to play here. The Mengarini variation with 2a3, 3b4, 4c3, and 5e takes d5. With that, we've looked at all the 4 knight c3 variations. Now, let's see what happens if white blocks the attack on their rook with c3 instead. Here, we play d5, which has a 60% win rate for black on Lichess. After e takes d5, queen takes d5, and the most common move, knight f3, we simply play knight c6, developing another piece. If b5, we have knight e5, essentially forcing knight takes e5 to avoid knight d3 check. So, after knight takes e5 and bishop takes e5, black has a crushing -1.1 position that white simply cannot handle. This position is won by black in 90% of games, as white has too many weaknesses and zero development. On move 6 though, if instead of knight f3 they play b takes c5, we should just play e5, taking the full center and preventing d4 from coming. Here, white is faced with the same problems though, of having no development and no central control. The Mengarini variation with 2a3, 3b4, 4c3, and 5f3. Instead of 5 e takes d5 in lines where white blocks with c3, what if they play f3 instead? This prevents black's queen from getting active on the recapture, whilst also defending the weak pawn. Well, here we just play d takes e4 anyway, and after f takes e4 we play knight f6, developing a piece and immediately attacking the undefended pawn. If e5 is played, knight g4 advances the knight and attacks the pawn again. This forces d4, c takes d4, c takes d4, and knight c6. If white desperately holds on with knight f3, arguing no pawns will be lost here, we insist with queen b6. The idea now is that if something like h3, we will play knight g takes e5, d takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and bishop takes e5, and we're attacking the rook on a1 and threatening to check on g3 simultaneously. This puts the king into a devastatingly vulnerable position at the expense of our knight. However, no Lichess game has ever reached this point, so the likelihood is your opponents will blunder something before this move, or just allow you to win the central pawns with no contest. The Mengarini variation with 2a3, 3b4, 4c3, and 5b takes c5. With that being said, 5f3 comes with its own complications, making it not such a great option for white. But what if they just play 5b takes c5 instead? Well, we just play d takes e4 here, and there's not really any notable theory as we're -1.7 on evaluation. White has no tricks here, and black should be winning even if they let Pegasus Chess play it without an engine. So, with that being said, we'll move on to a different variation. The Mengarini variation with 2a3, 3 knight c3, and 4 bishop c4. So, all in all, only one variation with 3b4 seems to be playable for white, being chapter 23 on the Lichess study. Now, let's explore some other potential lines with 3 knight c3 being played instead. After knight c3, we play bishop g7. We'll explore more options on move 4 later, but first let's look at white's most common move in bishop c4. We won't look too deep into the theory here, as most of these themes will come up later in the video, as these positions are essentially just closed Sicilian lines, with a weird inclusion of a3 and don't offer any meaningful differences. After bishop c4, we play knight c6. White's most common response is d3, to which we play e6, which goes into a simple French Sicilian structure. After knight ge2 or knight f3, we play knight ge7, and we're now threatening to play d5. Once white castles short, we follow suit, castling ourselves, with our next plan being d5 almost no matter what white does. In these positions, we will play b6 and fianchetto our bishop onto the b7 square, and try to tear open the center in a way that benefits our light-squared bishop. These positions are quite simple and similar to the closed Sicilian lines, so again, if you want to know more about these positions, skip to later in the video. The Mengarini variation with 2a3, 3 knight c3, 4 knight f3, and 6 knight takes d4. Instead of 4 bishop c4 though, a much more elaborate plan would be to play 4 knight f3 instead, although after black's knight c6, this could transpose with bishop c4. The alternating line would be 5 bishop b5 from white, which allows black to have some more accurate lines to follow. Here we play knight d4, which we actually won't look at too deeply as it comes up again in the closed Sicilian. If knight takes d4, c takes d4 displaces the c3 knight, forcing it back to e2. We then play knight f6, attacking the weakened pawn, knowing if e5, knight d5 will attack the weak pawn again. If knight takes d4 follows, queen b6 hits the knight, forcing c3, and bishop takes e5. We threaten to win a pawn by first capturing the knight. If white tries to avoid this, they will drop their bishop, and after knight takes e5, we play knight f4, discovering an attack on the knight. If instead of 8e5 they play d3, we simply play queen a5 check and pick up the bishop also. The Mengarini variation with 2a3, 3 knight c3, 4 knight f3, and 6 bishop c4. So now we know white taking on d4 with their knight on move 6 will result in poor positions. What if they played the best move, bishop c4? Well, now we play e6 and we get our preferred French Sicilian structure. However, e6 has a few purposes. Firstly, it allows the knight to jump into e2, supporting d5 in many ways. But it also holds the d5 square and prevents anything from landing on it. So if d3 from white, knight e7, castles and castles, we have a very positive closed Sicilian-esque line that is super untheoretical. I don't really need to continue to explain these themes here. Again, if you'd like to learn more about these positions, skip to the closed Sicilian section. The Mengarini variation with 2a3, 3 knight c3, 4 knight f3, and 6 castles. Although 6 bishop c4 was the optimal line for white after knight d4, it's worth noting what we should do if white just castles short and leaves their bishop to be captured. Here, we just play a6, allowing bishop c4. This position may look familiar as after e6 we have essentially transposed into chapter 29 of the Lichess study, barring the move a6 from black. So with that being said, there's not any need to continue on this variation. The Mengarini variation with 2a3, 3 knight c3, and 4 f4. With that last variation, we move on from white's response of 4 knight f3, and we need to look at a few rare lines on the 4th turn. Let's start exploring what to do if 4 f4 is played. 4 f4 attempts to turn this into a Grand Prix attack, however, the move order is punishable. We continue by playing the thematic knight c6. In majority of games, white will follow up by playing knight f3, to which we respond with the, again, thematic move of e6, successfully reaching the French Sicilian structure. In this position, we will only look at the move b4, as anything other than b4 directly corresponds into concepts we'll explore in the Grand Prix attack later in the video. The literal only difference is that white wasted a move by playing a3 for no reason, so black is up a tempo. So after b4, we importantly do not play c takes b4, which results in white winning 70% of games, but instead we play the simple b6. This defends our weakened c5 pawn, whilst simultaneously opening up a square for our bishop. White mostly plays e5 here, to which we follow up with knight ge7, preparing to castle. Here though, there are a few important moves to look out for. Firstly, if b takes c5, and knight e4, we simply castle short to avoid the checks. If instead of b takes c5, b5 is played, we play knight d4, centralizing the knight. If knight takes d4, c takes d4, and knight e4, we again play castles to avoid any checks. Notice in these variations how strong our light squared bishop will be. And a very important detail to add. If knight ge7, white immediately plays knight e4, you guessed it, we castle short to avoid any checks. If a knight ever lands on d6, we remove it with knight f5. The Mengarini variation with 2a3, 3 knight c3, and 4 g3. Another rare variation is white playing g3 on the 4th move instead of f4. However, after knight c6, this should transpose into chapters 21 to 22 on the Lichess study, so we'll omit this move from our study. The Mengarini variation with 2a3, 3h4, and 4 knight c3, bishop c4, knight f3, or d4. To find more variations to study, we need to go back to move 3, where white can play the audacious h4. Now, h4 is a weird move that allows for complications if you let it, so my advice is to not let it complicate things by playing h5 in response, to block the pawn from undermining our kingside structure and activating the rook. White can respond with multiple moves here. However, the inclusion of h4 doesn't force us to play in a different way than before. Maybe late middle games or end games will be different now, but our opening theory doesn't really change as no one has lost a tempo and the board hasn't changed much at all. So my advice for this section is to check chapters 33 to 36 of the Lichess study for some extra guidance, or just take what we know from previous variations and apply them to this one. The Mengarini variation with 2 a3 and 3 d4. We now have our final variation of the Mengarini variation, going back to move 3 where white can try to strike centrally immediately with d4. Here we played c takes d4, queen takes d4, and knight f6, blocking the queen's sight of our rook. If e5, knight c6 wards the queen away. If knight c3 instead of e5, or basically anything other than the move that we'll explore next, we'll still play knight c6, applying tempo to the queen. However, white may play bishop b5, preventing the knight from coming to c6. Here, we simply play a6. If the bishop goes back to c4, we can play knight c6. But if it goes back to a4, we'll first play b5, then following with knight c6. From here, black has a great position. We'll fianchetto both bishops and play d6 at the right time to prevent e5 from ever coming with any real venom. The Alapin Sicilian with 2 c3, 3 knight f3, 4 bishop c4, 5 knight g5, and 7 knight takes f7. We now swap our focus away to a much more common opening choice from white, which occurs on move 2. After e4, c5, white can employ the idea of c3. This is called the Alapin Sicilian, and essentially white plans on striking centrally with d4 with the support of the c3 pawn. There are numerous ways to play here from black. I spent hours exploring lines which prevented white from having any good lines, and I landed on a move that is played in just 4% of Alapin games, e5. e5 keeps things simple for us as a lot of closed Sicilian lines later in the video will have a pawn on e5. This move also prevents d4 from coming with much venom at all. As expected though, white has numerous responses which we must cover. Let's begin with the top engine move and the most commonly played one, knight f3. There's nothing to punish here as white has done nothing wrong. However, we must defend our e5 pawn. d6 is not viable because knight f3 also supports the d4 pawn break, so we must contest this while simultaneously defending the pawn on e5 with knight c6. The fourth move is one we'll come back to later as white again has numerous options, but bishop c4 is the one filled with the most theory as white will have sacrificing opportunities. So after bishop c4 we play knight f6, developing another piece. As you can imagine though, knight f6 invites knight g5 into the position, creating a double threat on the f7 pawn. How do we stop this? Well, we simply play d5, e takes d5, and knight takes d5. At the end of this sequence of trades, white has 4 options. Let's look at them all individually, starting with the immediate sacrifice of knight takes f7. We now have an only move of king e6 to hold onto our knight on d5. From here, every move from white is responded to with the same move. If d4 for example, we play knight a5 attacking the bishop. If the bishop goes back to d3, we play e takes d4, and we can defend this position up an entire piece. In this position, we're negative 1.6 on evaluation. Instead of bishop d3, white does have this challenging move, bishop g5. However, we simply play queen d7 and we continue with the same plan to follow. The Alapin Sicilian with 2 c3, 3 knight f3, 4 bishop c4, 5 knight g5, and 7 queen h5. However, white did not have to play 7 knight takes f7 and could have played more conservatively with queen h5, threatening mate on f7 without sacrificing any material. Here we play the simple g6, kicking the queen whilst blocking the mate threat. White will play queen f3, to which we'll play queen takes g5, taking the knight off the board whilst sacrificing our own. Bishop takes d5 will be played by white, threatening another checkmate. However, here we can just play knight d8 to defend the threat. Here, white will just castle short, and it's important we play queen e7 to get out of the way of d4, discovering an attack on our queen. This invites d4 anyway, to which we reply with c takes d4, and e takes d4. White has a few continuations, however we'll only look at the main one and you can see the rest on the Lichess study. The main move for white is bishop f4, to which we respond with the odd looking g5. This is simply to displace the bishop, as white can currently threaten queen g3 and bishop d6 to skewer the queen and the rook if black attempts to castle. Once the bishop lands on g3, we play bishop g7, knight d2 and bishop e6, completing our development and preparing to castle short. This position is super awkward, but we're up a pawn, and if we can hold on to said pawn, we'll easily be winning. The Alapin Sicilian with 2 c3, 3 knight f3, 4 bishop c4, 5 knight g5, and 7 queen f3. Whilst the previous line is quite solid for white, there are still more possibilities on move 7 which must be explored. Instead of queen h5, let's look into the immediate queen f3, which attacks our knight and the f7 mating square. Here we must borrow a theme from previous lines and take white's free knight on g5. White cannot play queen takes d5 because of bishop e6, so they're forced to play bishop takes d5 here, threatening mate on f7 while simultaneously threatening to take on c6. We prevent both of these threats by playing queen f6. If queen takes f6, we play g takes f6, and this endgame is slightly better for black, as we have better central control and better piece activity. However, if bishop takes c6 check, we play b takes c6, opening up the b file and asking questions of white. Should they trade queens, again this is a better endgame for black, as we have better central control and now the bishop pair. It's important to note we always have bishop a6 to prevent castling among many other good moves in this position. Black is -1 here. The Alapin Sicilian with 2 c3, 3 knight f3, and 4 bishop b5. So with all of those variations out the way, we're finally done with the sacrificial lines on f7. Now let's explore what to do if white plays bishop b5 on move 4 instead of bishop c4. This is going to be very similar to some other lines we've looked at. However, there is the inclusion of c3 in Alapin lines. We start by playing a6, if bishop a4, b5, and bishop c2, we just play bishop b7, and this position is extremely simple after castles and knight f6. There isn't really much theory needed. However, the most common move on move 5 is bishop takes c6, forcing us to find d takes c6, this time opening up the defense of the d4 square and preventing d4. If knight takes e5, queen g5 forks the g2 pawn and the knight, forcing knight f3, queen takes g2, rook g1, queen h3, rook g3, and queen h5. We can play on white's predictability here, knowing they must castle long now. We can quickly develop our pieces and claim we have a better structure than white and should be better. However, if instead of knight takes e5, white short castles, we continue simply with bishop d6 defending the e5 pawn. After d4, e takes d4, and c takes d4, we have bishop g4 pinning the knight to the queen. If d takes c5, ignoring a threat, we play bishop takes c5, and white has undoubled our pawn whilst improving our position. Black's play here should be very straightforward, and we play a position with a pawn majority on the queen side and a pawn to target on e4. The Alapin Sicilian with 2 c3, 3 knight f3, and 4 d4. So bishop e5 on the fourth move was pretty straightforward, but what if they play d4 instead? d4 strikes centrally early and attempts to undermine black's control, but it doesn't come without its own pros and cons for white. In response to d4, black should play c takes d4, c takes d4, e takes d4, and knight takes d4. We simply cannot hold the central tension, as all of white's ways of breaking it are positive for them. We continue beyond the trades by playing knight f6. What comes next though is a beautiful line which will require some theoretical endgame training. If on move 7, white plays knight takes c6, we play d takes c6, queen takes d8 check, king takes d8, knight c3, bishop b4, bishop g5, h6, bishop takes f6 check, g takes f6, long castles, and king e7. Whilst this position may look bad for black, it's almost -1, and we have not put any bad moves on the board for white. We have put their most common moves. If this variation starts with 4d4, the resulting position is extremely likely. Black has better king activity, the bishop pair, slightly more central control, 2 useful open files, and a queenside pawn majority. This endgame must be studied though, so feel free to practice this specific endgame against the engine. If instead of 7, knight takes c6 though, white plays knight c3, we continue with bishop b4 attempting to transpose. Here, the most common continuation is still knight takes c6, d takes c6, and transposing into the endgame we just looked at. We should be extremely happy if this happens in our games, as although at first glance the endgame looks bad, it's extremely intuitive for black. The Alapin Sicilian with 2 c3, 3 knight f3, 4 bishop c4, and 5 d3. In variations where knight f3 is played on the third move, there is only one more variation to look into when it comes to the fourth move in this sequence, after knight c6, which is bishop c4. There are 2 main instances of this after our response of knight f6. The first of which is 5d3. This is a passive but solid move that attempts to develop the dark square bishop without committing to tear open the center. In some Roy Lopez lines, white may also choose to play d3 as opposed to d4 to keep the position closed. Keeping with the closed theme, we respond with bishop e7, choosing not to fianchetto our bishop, and after castles and castles from either side, white will play rook e1. We can continue simply here with d6, and because white chose to play a more passive closed game with 5d3, we don't really need any more theory here. The position is simple, and the ideas should come naturally, with bishop e6 being a decent idea to try and activate the bishop whilst opening up the f-file. The Alapin Sicilian with 2c3, 3 knight f3, 4 bishop c4, and 5 castles. The second variation involving 4 bishop c4 in the Alapin is white simply choosing to castle short after we develop our knight to f6. This is a unique variation as it leaves white's e4 pawn undefended and allows us to grab it with knight takes e4. However, white can try to regain this pawn with rook e1, skewering the knight and the e5 pawn. If this happens, we simply play d5 with a tempo on the bishop whilst defending the knight. If bishop b5, attempting to win the e5 pawn again by pinning its defender, we respond with f6, defending the pawn with another pawn and making it unwinnable for white. White will now respond with d4, to which we play c takes d4, and bishop b4. Although our e-pawn is now attacked twice, we danger level white by attacking their rook. If knight c3 blocking the attack, we castle short. If white does not find queen b3, black is completely winning as we have overloaded pressure on the c3 square. If white does find queen b3, we play bishop takes c3, and we have reached a very strong position for black that is, although still sharp, does not require much more theory. The Alapin Sicilian with 2c3, 3d4, and 4 queen takes d4. So now we've looked at all of the possibilities in the Alapin with knight f3 on move 3, let's look at two other possible and probable moves on the third turn for white, starting with d4. d4 on move 3 attempts to undermine the center one move earlier than the last variation, but is not so solid for white. We break all tension centrally with c takes d4, c takes d4, e takes d4, and queen takes d4. Now, white's developed queen is a target of our development, and we can play knight c6. After queen d1, retreating, we can play knight f6, and black has 2 pieces developed compared to white's 0. White must also develop defending their e-pawn, so they'll play knight c3 here. Now we play bishop e4, developing whilst pinning the e4 pawn's defender, forcing white to play bishop d3 or they'll lose the pawn. But here we just play castles, and black has a fantastic position up development. After knight f3, we play bishop takes c3 check, b takes c3, and d5, shredding open the position, and the entire game will be played on the fact that white has split queenside pawns, which we can target all game long. The Alapin Sicilian with 2c3, 3d4, and 4 knight f3. Instead of queen takes d4 on move 4 though, white can attempt to play a more modern style and play knight f3, allowing the pawn to sit on d4 momentarily as to not allow tempo. However, in this case, we just play bishop c5, knight takes d4, and knight f6. If e5 is played, we play knight e4, diving into the position and threatening queen a5 check, with pressure on the dark square diagonal. If instead of e5, knight c3 is played, we simply follow up with short castles, and after bishop e2, we strike again centrally with d5. This time, white's queenside pawns are not split and we have a much more boring game. However, black is completely equal and has better development thus far. The Alapin Sicilian with 2c3 and 3f4. Our final line in the Alapin comes with an altered variation again when white plays f4 on the third turn. This, however, is an unsound gambit, and with accurate play, black should be better. We first play e takes f4, taking the free pawn, and allow white to follow up with knight f3, developing. We'll then play bishop e7 to develop a piece and prevent bishop c4 from coming with any venom as the g5 square remains covered. If d4, we're already winning with bishop h4 check, as white cannot block because of our f4 pawn. They must concede castling rights and our play becomes very simple. However, if instead of d4 they play bishop c4, we strike centrally with d5, seemingly giving up a full pawn. If e takes d5, we play knight f6, continuing to develop and immediately threatening to win the d5 pawn back. But if the more natural bishop takes d5, how can we justify giving up the pawn? Well, we follow up by playing bishop h4 check. After king e2, it may seem like this is something we could have done without giving up our pawn, but with the d7 pawn off the board, our queen is completely opened up. We follow with knight f6, sacrificing our bad bishop. As if knight takes h4, we play knight takes d5, forcing knight f3 retreating. We too retreat with knight f3, and in this position, black is winning by negative 0.7 on evaluation, as white has no castling rights and black's development is extremely straightforward. Because white sacrificed a pawn in the opening, we can afford to sacrifice it back for activity, and in this position, it's unlikely white will be able to justify their moves as their entire queenside cannot develop. The delayed Alapin with e6 and 3 c3. The delayed Alapin is an important inclusion of this video, as it ties into what we'll play if white plays 2 knight f3 instead of 2 c3. Because we want to play the Alapin Sicilian in this repertoire, we'll respond with e6, creating a French Sicilian structure. But what if white delays the Alapin and plays c3 on move 3 here, exploiting the fact we've committed to playing e6? Well, the line I came up with to avoid getting theoretically swamped by white here is to play knight e7. The idea is that we'll look to transpose into some French defense structures to avoid needing to learn an entirely new Sicilian line while still having great winning opportunities. This French structure arises after d4, c takes d4, c takes d4, and d5 from black. If e takes d5, we play knight takes d5 and target the isolated d4 pawn. However, it's much more common for white to advance with e5. We follow up with knight bc6, with white continuing with one of 3 options. Let's look at them all. If knight c3, we follow up with knight f5, piling up pressure on the d4 pawn. White again has a separate 3 moves to play on the 8th turn, so we'll look at those individually too. Let's first explore bishop e3. Here we play bishop e7, preparing to castle. If bishop d3 follows, we play castles, knowing if bishop takes f5 and e takes f5, we've at the very least opened up a square for our bad French bishop to sit. Best case scenario, if white castles short, we can launch forwards g5 to start an attack. If instead of 8 bishop e3, they play bishop d3, we play knight f takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, castles, and bishop d7 to protect our king from any checks. Queen g4 is the most testing line for white, to which we simply retreat our knight to c6. We're just up a pawn here, and whilst retaining it won't be a walk in the park, our play is intuitive at the very least. Again on move 8, white can also play bishop e5, but here we have a very simple follow-up of bishop d7, blocking the pin. If castles, we play queen b6, attacking the d4 pawn. After bishop takes c6 and bishop takes c6, black should be very happy with the position as white has a permanent weakness in d4. We have the bishop pair and relatively clear plans to follow. However, back on move 7, we mentioned white had 2 other choices to choose from that we must cover. Bishop e3 was one of them instead of knight c3. Here, we play knight f5. But after bishop takes f3, e takes f5 and castles, we cannot follow up with g5 this time as we'd blunder a pawn. Instead, we first play bishop e7, and after knight c3, we have the option to play g5. Or we can continue more principally and play bishop e6. Both moves are good, and you can play whichever you like. Knight a3 is also a move instead of bishop d3 or knight c3 for white on move 7. So let's quickly wrap up the delayed Alapin by exploring it. We again play knight f5, but now white has knight c2, wrapping the knight around to defend the pawn. Here, we play the interesting sequence of queen a5 check, bishop d2, queen b6, and bishop c3. This is a forced sequence, otherwise white will lose the d4 pawn. But now we can launch forwards a5 with the intention of playing knight b4 to break up the white position. So if bishop d3 in response to a5, we can just play knight b4. We know bishop takes f5 is not great for white as it gives us bishop e6, but if they play bishop takes b4 for example, we play a takes b4, and after castles we can just play bishop e2, and although we have doubled pawns, because our doubled pawn is so far advanced, it leads to white's a2 pawn being weak. The Smith-Morra Gambit with 2 d4. Now we need to move on to an entirely new opening, which coincidentally shares some qualities of the Alapin Sicilian. The Smith-Morra Gambit. It's played on move 2, where white will immediately strike centrally with d4, gambiting their pawn. We want to accept the Smith-Morra Gambit by playing e takes d4, although if you don't want to play into it, you can play knight f6 and transpose into the Alapin Sicilian. However, it won't be the one we studied. If white plays queen takes d4, we have knight c6 developing with tempo, so white will not do this, but instead play c3, asking black if they'd like to take another pawn. I recommend not taking on c3, but to instead play the move e5, going for a similar structure to our Alapin. If c takes d4, and queen takes d4, we can again follow up with knight c6, giving tempo on the queen. However, to bypass this, they're more likely to play knight f3, attacking the indefensible pawn once again. We now follow with knight c6, and after knight takes d4, we do not take in the center, but continue to develop with knight f6. The following line, although seems somewhat cherry-picked, is almost what all players on Lichess play. So after knight c3, we play bishop b4, pinning the knight to the king. Now, if white plays knight takes c6, we play d takes c6, fixing our structure. If queen takes d8, we play king takes d8, and white will follow with with bishop g5. Here we play the top engine move, which is also an incredible trick, h6. All players with white will capture on f6 in some order. For example, bishop takes f6 check, g takes f6, and long castles. But after king e7 in this position, black is much better in the endgame. Why? Well, we have much better king activity. We have the bishop pair, and our rooks have better files to work on. Not to mention, we have a queenside majority to top it all off. This is a common endgame in the Smith-Morra if you play e5 as a response to it. Although you may not end up in this exact endgame every time, any other try from white allows for intuitive play for black, which doesn't typically need theory. The Smith-Morra Gambit deferred with 4c3. It must be said though, unlike the delayed Alapin, the Smith-Morra Gambit can also be delayed until move 3. Instead of 2d4, they'll play knight f3, baiting us into playing e6 and only then striking with d4. Here we play c takes d4, and now white plays c3 to fully gambit the pawn. Here we play d takes c3, knight takes c3, and a6. This is called the Kramnik Variation, and although the position may look weird now, once we cover how to play the Kramnik Sicilian later in the video, it'll make much more sense. After bishop c4, we play b5, kicking the bishop back whilst making room for our bishop to develop on b7. After bishop b3, we play bishop b7, and after castles, we simply develop with knight c6. After a move like queen e2, we play knight ge7 and plan to reroute our knight to g6, play bishop e7 and castle short. Again, it might be best to come back to this portion of the video later, as it largely transposes into a lot of Kramnik Sicilian ideas that we're going to explore, but for now, let's move on. The closed Sicilian with 3 knight f3, 4 bishop c4, and 5 d3. Now it's time to move on to one of the more popular Sicilians from white, which is the closed Sicilian. Just to be clear, the Grand Prix attack will have its own section of theory following the closed Sicilian, even though it's a derivative. The closed Sicilian follows e4, c5, and knight c3, opting not to support the opening of the game with knight f3 and d4, but playing a much slower approach. Here, we stay away from the French Sicilian structure and immediately play knight c6, which won't be the case in the open Sicilian. White will now follow with knight f3 almost every game, to which we respond by preventing d4 from ever coming by taking the center with e5. In any open Sicilian, e5 wouldn't be possible as the square would not yet be supported by the c6 knight. However, the slow 2 knight c3 from white makes this possible. The first fork in the road in the closed Sicilian will be on move 4, where white can play bishop c4, although we'll come back to what to do if they play bishop b5 later. In response to bishop c4, we just play g6. I generally prefer Fianchetto setups in these positions as opposed to bishop e7, despite most players arguing it will only stare into your e5 pawn. g6 supports an eventual f5 push, and the bishop can often make itself useful on h6, so I much prefer g6 to bishop e7. After white plays d3, opening up their dark squared bishop, we must prevent knight g5 by playing h6. If we don't, the knight can land on g5 and threaten our f7 pawn. Bishop e3 will be the continuation for white, to which we defend our pawn with d6, simultaneously opening up our light squared bishop. If white plays knight d5, we're transposing into the next variation we're going to look at. However, white can also play queen d2, which is a very popular choice, threatening to castle long. Here we just play bishop g7, inviting them to castle long, and when they do, either a6 or rook b8 threatens to launch the pawn forward, and black should have better attacking chances than white. The reason for this is white's light squared bishop and c3 knight are both targets for our pawns to progress with tempo, whilst gaining space. However, white cannot target any pieces in their attack. Closed Sicilian with 3 knight f3, 4 bishop c4, and 5 castles. Instead of castling long though, white can definitely opt to castle short with decent ideas. So on move 5, instead of playing d3, they can castle short. We continue with bishop g7, developing our bishop and preparing to castle short as well. White will follow this by playing d3 and opening up their dark squared bishop. We again want to play h6 here as to prevent anything from landing on g5. If we play knight f6, white has unnecessary play and can trade off their dark squared bishop for our knight. They will then try to prove our dark squared bishop is a bad bishop and dominate it. Following, white will play bishop e3 attacking our pawn, to which we simply respond with d6 to defend it. White will again play queen d2, this time not threatening to castle long, but just connecting the rooks whilst preventing us from castling ourselves, as to not blunder the h6 pawn. Here we play knight ge7, developing another piece. We can afford to delay castling here as the position is closed, hence the closed Sicilian, and white will have no way to target our central king. After knight d5, which almost fully transposes into the line we mentioned in the previous variation, we play bishop e6, developing our final piece. A mass trade is usually played here, with knight takes e7, queen takes e7, bishop takes e6, queen takes e6, c3, and long castles for black. This results in an opposite side castling game, which slightly favors black, as the pawn storm is just a little bit faster. If instead of that mass trade on move 10, white prefers c3 immediately, we now play bishop takes d5, e takes d5, and knight b8 retreating. If d4 now comes, c takes d4, c takes d4, and e4 is a very strong position for black, where we can target white's central pawn. The closed Sicilian with 3 knight f3, 4 bishop b5, and 5 bishop takes c6 check. We mentioned in the closed Sicilian that on move 4, white had both options of bishop c4 and bishop b5. Let's now explore bishop b5 as a potential move. White is currently threatening to remove the defender of the e5 pawn, so we need to reinforce it with d6. If bishop takes c6, which is a move we'll come back to, we play b takes c6 and enjoy the half-open b-file. After the thematic d3 from white, we play knight e7, planning to now reroute our knight to the g6 square, as without the light squared bishop being on the board for white, and the d5 square being defended by the c6 pawn, the knight would serve no purpose on f6. So after knight e7 and castles, we can play knight g6. The remainder of this variation is not very theoretical, so we'll stop there. The knight on g6 also stops white from playing f4, but allows black to play f5 once we're castled, allowing us all the play, and white none. The closed Sicilian with 3 knight f3, 4 bishop b5, and 5 castles. We mentioned on move 5 would come back to a different line, and that line is white castling short. This is an improved variation from white, to which we now need to play knight f6 as the d5 square is not contested. If white plays d3, now we do not need to play h6 as the bishop is not on c4 threatening the f7 pawn, negating the effects of knight g5, and instead we play bishop e7. If bishop g5 we play castles, white will again, like we spoke about, try to trade off their dark squared bishop and prove ours is bad. But after bishop takes f6, we play bishop takes f6, knight e5, and bishop e6, developing our final piece. If white wants to take our bishop on f6, we're okay with that, but the long-term plan is to play bishop e7 and launch forwards with f5. If knight e5 is on move 7 though, we do not want to play castles as white can snap up our knight on f6 and begin opening the position with c3. We want to act faster. Instead, we play knight takes d5, e takes d5, and a6, kicking the bishop away. If bishop takes c6, b takes c6, and d takes c6, we play queen e7, and once we regain the pawn, bishop b7 will be a great place for our bishop. However, if d takes c6, we play a takes b5. If c takes b7, we play bishop takes b7, and we've achieved an improved version of this line, which we should be very happy with. The closed Sicilian Fianchetto Variation, with 2 knight c3, 3 g3, 5 d3, and 7 bishop takes c5. Now it's time to look at an opening that should not be underestimated by any means, but is the Fianchetto variation of the closed Sicilian. This occurs after white plays 3 g3 instead of 3 knight f3. I like to respond to the Fianchetto variation by preparing to Fianchetto ourselves with g6. After bishop g2, the natural bishop g7 should follow. If white opens up their dark squared bishop with d3, we want to play the peculiar rook b8 here, which prepares to launch forwards b5 and get some really nice position. If bishop b3, for example, we can sacrifice the pawn with b5, and if bishop takes c5, we play queen a5, putting pressure on the c3 knight, which is currently pinned 2 ways. If bishop e3 retreating, we apply pressure to the pinned piece with b4. If knight ce2, bishop takes b2, rook b1, and queen takes a2, and we must consolidate up a pawn. However, if knight d5, we play e6. To stay in the game, white must find bishop f4, to which we respond with bishop takes b2, bishop takes b8, and b3 check. However, the most common move is knight f3, where we play bishop takes b2, rook b1, b3 check, bishop d2, and b takes a2, sacrificing the queen as we'll make another one. After bishop takes a5, we play a takes b1 equals queen, and after queen takes b1, we play bishop c3 check, and discover an attack on the white queen to win it back. We'll very quickly go back to move 5 in this variation, as white could have played knight ge2 instead of d3. If this happens, we want rook b8 anyway, and after d3 we just play b5. Our ideas here are simply to play d6, knight ge7, and castle short. The closed Sicilian Fianchetto variation with 2 knight c3, 3 g3, 5 d3, and 7 queen d2. It's important to note that on the 7th move, white does not need to take our free pawn and can play queen d2, threatening to castle long. Here we go for a similar setup to one we've employed at the end of the last variation by playing d6. If knight ge2, we play knight d4, and the knight cannot be captured without white having either their pieces forked or trading off their strong dark squared bishop. Instead, they'll castle short, allowing b4. White needs to play knight d1, and we simply follow up with e6, allowing our knight to e7. We certainly have a position here as black, and the theory becomes too dense to really memorize from here on out. so we'll leave it here. The close Sicilian Fianchetto Variation with 2 knight c3, 3 g3, 5 d3, and 6 f4. On the 6th move in the previous line we just looked at, white is also not forced to play bishop d3 attacking our pawn. f4 is a popular choice from white, and we should learn what to do if it occurs. We continue with the thematic b5, pushing our pawn up the board and taking space. Knight f3 is played in over 80% of games, to which we respond by playing b4 and kicking the knight. After knight e2 we play d6, and we again go for this same setup where we have a position with so much life in it, and one that should be quite intuitive. Theoretically this is quite uncharted, so whilst the theory here is not necessary, you should play around with these positions and see what plan works best for you, as there are not really any short-term ideas apart from simple, intuitive development. The Grand Prix attack with 2 knight c3, 3 f4, 5 bishop c4, and 6 d3. The next variation within the Sicilian defense we'll look at is the Grand Prix attack, which occurs in the closed Sicilian after e4, c5, knight c3, and knight c6. It's initiated on the 3rd move by white, when they opt to take space on the f-file with f4. A reason why the Grand Prix attack is so popular is because players play the opening systematically. This is appealing for players that don't want to learn Sicilian theory as white, so there are plenty of ways we can punish this opening. We first want to play g6. A big idea in the Grand Prix attack is controlling the f5 square, and g6 does that whilst preparing to fianchetto the bishop. In response, white almost always plays knight f3 to develop whilst controlling the center, to which we play the thematic bishop g7, preventing d4 from coming for white and keeping the position closed. On move 5, white can play either bishop c4 or bishop b5. We'll come back to bishop b5 later, but let's look at bishop c4 first, to which we respond with e6. e6 forces their light squared bishop to stare into a pawn chain, whilst also opening up a square for our g-knight to hop in on e7. It also defends the f5 square, which we mentioned earlier. White has several options on the 6th turn, which we'll explore separately, but let's first look at what to do if they open up their dark squared bishop with d3. We continue thematically with knight g e7, just developing another piece, preparing to castle, and potentially looking for d5. If white castles, we follow suit, and if queen e1, which is a very thematic move in any opening where white plays f4, we play d5 striking centrally. After white's bishop b3, we continue by playing b6, preparing to put our bishop on the b7 square, and black has a fantastic position that doesn't require any more theory. If white plays a move like queen h4, we can play knight d4, and the central trade favors black heavily after knight takes d4, c takes d4, knight e2, and a5, threatening to trap the bishop. If a4, d takes e4, d takes e4, and bishop a6 should be crushing for black. The Grand Prix attack with 2 knight c3, 3 f4, 5 bishop c4, and 6 f5. On move 6 of this variation, we mentioned that white had a few options. Now let's explore what to do if f5 is played. It should be noted, whilst f5 can be played in various middle games, in this specific variation it's an unsound sacrifice that can be defended easily. We first want to accept the free pawn with g takes f5. If e takes f5 back, we just play d5, hitting the bishop and striking centrally. After bishop b5, we play knight e7, and if f takes e6, we respond with d takes e6. If white castles short, so do we. And where is white's attack coming from? Black has the entire center, an open f-file for the rook, and near complete development. White, on the other hand, has no central control and an entanglement of pieces. If instead of e takes f5 on move 7, white plays the more modest d3, we just play knight g e7, and basically play the same moves as we would if they played e takes f5. If castles, castles, and if the thematic queen e1, now we can play f takes e4, d takes e4, and d5 striking centrally. In this situation where our g-file becomes open, we can actually shift our king to h8 and put the rook on the open g-file to attack white's king instead of it being a sitting duck. The Grand Prix attack with 2 knight c3, 3 f4, 5 bishop c4, and 6 e5. Again, we have one last variation to look at within this line, where on the 6th move, instead of f5, white attempts to go for e5 instead. The idea of e5 from white is to create holes in the black position on d6 and f5, exploiting them with knight e4 and hopping the knight in. We want to immediately address this genuine threat by playing d6 and attempting to undermine the e5 pawn that holds this idea together for white. If bishop b5, we play knight e7, and we plan to castle to unpin our knight. However, if e takes d6, we play queen takes d6, and we have successfully removed the problem pawn. However, now our queen is a little exposed, and white can try to exploit this by playing knight e4. We simply drop back with queen e7 here, avoiding any danger. We importantly need to stay defending our weak c5 pawn. It's very likely white will play d3 here to open up their bishop, to which we respond by playing knight f6, developing our knight and preparing to castle. If castles, castles, and we have a very strong setup that is almost completed. For example, if white plays c3, we play b6, and now all of our pieces have very obvious roles in the position, and we've reached a point where we can happily play chess without needing any more theory. The Grand Prix attack with 2 knight c3, 3 f4, 5 bishop b5, 6 castles, and 7 bishop c4. We can now move past variations of the Grand Prix attack with 5 bishop c4 and begin looking at what the other half of players play, which is bishop b5. Bishop b5 on move 5 is the acceptance of white having a bad bishop due to their pawn structure. In most cases, white will fully intend on trading the bishops off should black allow them. However, it's not quite as simple as that for white, as black can refuse to trade on white's terms and instead play knight d4. A good rule of thumb is if white attacks our knight first and it is not pinned by the king, it probably wasn't the right move. If knight takes d4, we play c takes d4, and if knight e2 counterattacking our pawn, knight f6 is much better for black. If knight takes d4, knight takes e4 is crushing as we discover an attack on the knight and the bishop is loose. If e5 instead of knight takes d4, we play knight h4, and we're still better as g4 is met with queen a5, and now we have sacrificing ideas with knight takes f4 and queen takes e5 check. Instead of knight takes d4 on move 6 though, white should just castle short to avoid the danger. We follow by kicking the bishop with a6. If bishop a4, b5 will trap the bishop, but if bishop c4, we play b5, bishop d5, and rook b8. After d3, we play d6, kicking the bishop and opening up space for our knight to jump into. After bishop b3, in response, we play bishop b7, and we have a great position as black where we're dominating for space and activity. The Grand Prix attack with 2 knight c3, 3 f4, 5 bishop b5, 6 castles, and 7 bishop d3. If we quickly go back to move 7 of the previous line, white weirdly has a few other working options instead of bishop c4 we need to look at, like the awkward looking bishop d3. This is a line that people actually play, and it's not so simple to punish. We want to start by playing b5. The idea is to just take space on the queen side whilst allowing bishop b7. In over 50% of games, white will take this opportunity to play knight takes d4, as it's very difficult to make progress if they don't. In response, we play c takes d4, which white will reply to with knight e2. Now we just play bishop b7, and white will play the only real move to get their bishop active, which is b3, preparing to Fianchetto. We can follow this up in more ways, but I recommend queen b6 first, over defending the d4 pawn and anticipating bishop b2. After bishop b2 does arrive, we can play the beautiful bishop takes e4, sacrificing our bishop, and after bishop takes e4, we play d3 check, discovering an attack on the king whilst attacking the knight and the bishop. Once king h1 is played, we take on b2, white takes on a8, we take on a1, white takes on a1, and finally we take on e2, threatening the rook and promotion. After rook e1, we play knight f6, and we're in a great position here for black where we have a slightly better structure than white once we castle short. The Grand Prix attack with 2 knight c3, 3 f4, 5 bishop e5, 6 castles, and 7 bishop e2. Instead of bishop d3 on the 7th turn, white can also try the more natural bishop e2, which allows the bishop to be bad voluntarily, rather than allowing black to have counterplay as a result of it. Similar ideology to the French bad bishop. In response to bishop e2, we just play e6, knowing we cannot punish the white position anytime soon and continuing development. If d3, opening up the dark squared bishop, we play knight e7, developing once again. To be completely honest, this position doesn't need theory. You can continue in any random move order as long as you're playing thematic moves. I was going to explain this position more, but the ideas are exactly the same as previous positions. However, we don't have a knockout blow anywhere and must just play chess in a slightly better position. So let's move on to the final Grand Prix attack variation. The Grand Prix attack with 2 knight c3, 3 f4, 5 bishop b5, and 6 knight takes d4. We go back just one move from the last line to finish off our theory of the Grand Prix attack, and look at knight takes d4 on the 6th turn. We've looked at lines similar to this already, but not this specific line, so we need to look at it independently. We respond similarly with c takes d4, allowing knight e2 from white. We then kick the bishop with a6, allowing bishop d3 before striking for the center with d5 ourselves, and threatening to undermine the e4 pawn. White almost always plays e5 here, advancing the pawn and allowing the knight to capture on d4 as the bishop's defense is now void. However, we can undermine this advanced pawn with f6 and threaten to capture it outright. If knight takes d4, f takes e5, f takes e5, and bishop takes e5 is a great structure for black, and we have central control and white has weird piece placement. Likewise, if 10e takes f6 and knight takes f6, both sides will just castle and black should be better because of our central control, and white's awkwardly placed bishop on d3. No theory beyond this point is necessary as we play around the already existing weaknesses of white. The Kramnik Variation with 3 c4. We'll only briefly touch on the Kramnik Variation as it transposes into the Maroczy bind, which we'll explore later in the video. It occurs after e4, c5, knight f3, e6, and the immediate c4 on move 3. In response, we play queen c7, which is slightly suboptimal, but we do this in order to transpose into another theoretical line to avoid having to learn 2 separate ones. I also think the engine's main line isn't realistic to be playing and doesn't give a comfortable game plan for black. After knight c3, we play a6, and we're slowly transposing into a Khan structure, threatening to break the bind with both b5 and d5. After d4, c takes d4, and knight takes d4, this fully transposes to chapters 24 to 27 on Lichess, and the Maroczy bind chapters on this video. So, for now, let's move on. The French Sicilian with 3 knight c3, 4 d4, and 6 bishop e3. We can finally get into the meat and potatoes of the Sicilian defense by figuring out what we want to play against the open Sicilian. This starts after e4, c5, knight f3, and e6, which is the French variation of the Sicilian defense. First, let's explore what to play if white chooses knight c3 in this position. Because we have not advanced our d-pawn, there is a small hole on the d6 square, which the c3 knight can reroute to through the b5 square. This is a much bigger problem than you might think, so we play a6 to stop it. In response, white will play d4, c takes d4, and knight takes d4, transposing into the Khan Sicilian. We continue with queen c7. The main purpose of this queen move is preventing e5 to allow knight f6 later on. The first fork in the road for white is what to play on move 6. We'll come back to look at other options later, but first let's consider the possibility of bishop e3. Here we just play knight f6 like we said we wanted to. This attacks the pawn and white will want to over-defend it. If they play bishop d3, we play b5 and prepare to develop our bishop to b7 to target said pawn long term. However, if they make the mistake of playing f3, now we play bishop b4. We're simply threatening to win a pawn once the knight is captured, so white will defend with queen d2. But d5 comes for black now, threatening to win the e4 pawn as the knight is pinned to the queen and king. If e takes d5, knight takes d5, and we've added another attacker to the pinned knight, and white will have to make some kind of concession. The French Sicilian with 3 knight c3, 4 d4, and 6 bishop d3. We mentioned on move 6 of the previous line white had more options, so let's now explore the possibility of bishop d3. Bishop d3 is a much better move as it immediately addresses the weak pawn, whilst preparing to castle short. So what do? Well, we first play knight f6, developing whilst preparing to castle ourselves. After white castles short, we play knight c6, offering the trade of pieces. If bishop e3 defending the knight, we play knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and bishop c5, offering a trade of bishops. If bishop takes c5, queen takes c5, and king h1, we simply take this opportunity to castle short. However, if f4, we must respect the move and play d6, preventing e5 from ever coming. If queen e1 supporting e5, we actually play e5 ourselves, and we've reached a very playable position for black, where we'll play b5 and activate a monstrous bishop. However, if instead of bishop takes c5 on move 10, white plays bishop takes f6, we play g takes f6, and we've opened up the g file on white's king. However, queen h5 is very dangerous, so we need to play queen e5 and allow this potential trade of queens. If white refuses and plays queen g4 for example, we play king f8 and it's game on. We're now preparing rook g8, hitting the queen whilst activating the rook. Going all the way back to move 8 though, white can just take on c6 instead of defending the knight. If this happens, we play b takes c6, allowing f4 immediately. To this though, we play the simple d5, and after e5, we drop the knight back to d7. White cannot push f5 without dropping their e5 pawn, and they won't ever get the time to play f6 because we'll play g6 first, controlling the square. We continue this position, prioritizing g6 and bishop g7. But another idea is to play a5, preparing bishop a6 to activate the bishop. The French Sicilian with 3 knight c3, 4 d4, and 6 bishop e2. On the 6th turn, we have one more variation to look at, which is the move bishop e2. This is another strong choice from white as it allows them to castle as soon as possible. Again, we play knight f6 in response, and after they castle short, this time we play bishop e7. We cannot transpose into the previous line with knight c6, as after bishop e3 c3, the light-squared bishop is not obstructing the queen's defense of the knight. However, after f4, the game plan is similar to the previous line with d6 preventing e5. After king h1, we castle short, and our next goal is to play b5 and develop our light-squared bishop. These positions are essentially the same as the last, with the main difference being we do not have a fianchettoed bishop. The French Sicilian with 3 knight c3, 4 a4, and 5 d4. If we go back to move 4 this time, white has one more game plan they can employ with the move a4. This move has one purpose, stopping black from playing b5 and developing their bishop with ease. However, this plan is nothing to worry about, and we'll look into exactly why. First, we play knight c6, and after d4, c takes d4, and knight takes d4, we can now play queen c7. However, you may notice this position looks almost identical to some positions we just looked at. You'd be right in saying that. There is virtually no difference in this 4a4 line as opposed to the 4d4 line we just looked at. The French Sicilian with 3 knight c3, 4 a4, and 5 bishop c4. We cannot say the same about this next variation though, as instead of 5d4, white can also play bishop c4. This plan, however, is not as theoretically sound as the previous for white, but does force us to learn some new moves. We first play knight f6 immediately, as if they play e5, we can play knight g4 and counterattack the now weakened pawn on e5. Instead, white will just play d3, opening up their bishop and solidifying the center. Here, we play d5, striking centrally immediately, which will eventually force the bishop back. After e takes d5, and bishop a2, we play queen e2 check, queen e2, queen takes e2 check, knight takes e2, and bishop g4, threatening to double white's pawns. Bishop g5 threatens to do the same thing for white. However, we avoid this with bishop e7, and we have options to castle both ways. This endgame is slightly better for black. I could sit here and tell you all the reasons why, but as this is an openings video and not an endgame video, I feel it's unnecessary. I've guided you to a slightly advantageous endgame, so feel free to take some extra time to study this particular position if you feel it's necessary. The French Sicilian with 3 g3 and 5 d3. Before we jump into all of the Sicilian variations, we must explore this French Sicilian Fianchetto Variation hybrid, where white plays g3 on the third turn. However, it must be said, unlike the Fianchetto variation, when played against the French Sicilian, this is rather unproblematic for black. We immediately play knight c6, as white has made no contest for the center and we can begin to liberate it ourselves. After the near guaranteed bishop g2, we jump in with knight f6, attacking the central pawn whilst developing a piece, knowing that if e5 ever comes, we recycle the knight g5 idea to counterattack it. Move 5 is where we have a crossroad of 3 main moves white can play. Let's first explore the possibility of d3. This opens up the bishop whilst defending the central pawn, but is a very slow move. In response, we take control of the center by playing d5 ourselves. If knight bd2, we play bishop e7, castles, and rook e1. We play b5, taking the space on the queen side. After e5, we play knight d7, and our goal in this position is to play on the queen side and use not only our extra space, but our entire central control to our advantage. However, instead of knight bd2, if white plays e takes d5, we play e takes d5, castles, bishop e7, rook e1, and castles. This is a super simple position, and I feel does not need explaining. We want to play b6 in a lot of these lines to fianchetto the bishop and contest our opponent's one. The French Sicilian with 3 g3 and 5 queen e2. On move 5, white has another 2 options. Let's now look at what to do if queen e2 occurs. Queen e2 defends the central pawn and also threatens to play e5. However, our response is very simple. Because queen e2 was not a drastic improvement to the white position, we treat it as a one-move threat and can play a slow move that solves the problem. So here, we play e5 ourselves and prevent white from playing it. This will essentially transpose the position into a closed Sicilian with pawns on c5 and e5. However, let's look at a few more moves. If knight c3, we play d6, reinforcing the center and opening up our light-squared bishop. If castles, we play g6 and prepare to fianchetto our own bishop. It must be said we cannot transpose into the Fianchetto variation we already looked at because our pawn is on e5. After d3, bishop g7, bishop g5, h6, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and knight d5, white is arguing we now have a bad bishop. However, as stated in previous sections, we beg to differ. We just drop the bishop back to g7. From here, we'll castle short and plan on playing the f5 pawn break to open our rook, and black definitely has the easier game plan. The French Sicilian with 3 g3 and 5 knight c3. Finally, we can look at our last French Sicilian variation with knight c3 being played on the 5th turn for white. Knight c3 is another move that doesn't really prevent us from playing d5, so naturally we play it. If white castles short, this transposes to one of the sublines in chapter 21 of the Lichess study. However, if they play e takes d5, and d4, we play bishop g4, pinning the knight to the queen. If d takes c5, we actually play d5 now, and like a lot of lines in the Salvio counter gambit or the Reti gambit, this passed pawn becomes a big asset for us. Of course, we'll sweep up the loose pawn with our bishop whenever we can, but our entire game plan from here revolves around us using the d5 pawn as an asset and not allowing it to be a target. The Maroczy bind with 5 c4 and 7 bishop e3. The Maroczy bind in any standard Sicilian opening would usually be quite annoying, but because of the dynamic pawn structure of the Sicilian, it's actually not the end of the world. The Maroczy bind occurs after e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, a6, and c4. This move, putting the center of the board in a chokehold, is actually not so bad because we have both b5 and d5 to attempt to break out of it. However, we first play the thematic queen c7 to allow our knight to develop to f6. White almost always replies with knight c3, to which we play the planned knight f6. On the 7th turn, white has 4 different lines they can go down. We'll look at each of them individually, but first let's explore bishop e3 as a potential move. This allows bishop b4. However, unlike other lines, we do not threaten to win anything on c3 because the c4 pawn obstructs our queen's vision. White may respond to this in a few ways. If f3, we play bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and we target the doubled isolated pawns all game. If bishop d3, we do the same thing. Bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and target the pawns. However, the best move is queen b3, defending the knight while simultaneously attacking the loose bishop. In response, we just play bishop c5, keeping the tension. After bishop e2, castles and castles, we need to play d6, defending the bishop to avoid knight takes e6 ideas. However, after rook ac1, we just play b6 and continue with the most intuitive plans of planting the bishop on b7 and activating our knight. The Maroczy bind with 5 c4 and 7 bishop e2. Going back to the 7th move for white, we have plenty of other variations we need to look at. First, let's explore bishop e2 as an option. It's quite a complicated process to understand why we don't play bishop b4 in this position, so if you're unable to analyze why yourself on an analysis board, you'll just have to take my word for it, or I could sit here explaining it for a few minutes. We don't want to stray away from our thematic setup though, and instead we want to play b6, preparing to Fianchetto. After white castles short, we play bishop b7, activating our bishop on the long diagonal and attacking the loose pawn. If f3, we now play bishop b4, and we're now transposing into the line we looked at previously. If bishop e3 is played, we play bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and d6. This final move of d6 allows us to develop our knight to d7 and c5. Our plan from here on out will obviously be to target white's weak pawns, whilst making sure our d6 pawn doesn't become a weakness simultaneously. The Maroczy bind with 5 c4 and 7 bishop d3. Again, we want to go back to the 7th move in this line and explore what to do if white chooses to play bishop d3 now. Because bishop d3 obscures the queen's defense of its central knight, we now want to play knight c6 as they're forced to respond. If knight takes c6, we just play d takes c6, and we've opened up the central file, rendering the Maroczy bind somewhat useless. If white tries something like bishop e3, we now play knight e5, attacking the other bishop and pawn. White's best move in a position like this may be to give up the light squared bishop and even their pawn. If a move like b3, trying to hold on to everything, black is -1 after knight eg4. White cannot castle, and we're attacking their dark squared bishop, which would ruin their pawn structure. Bishop g5 is the most common response. However, we just play queen e5, jumping into the position and forking literally everything. Black is completely winning here. The Maroczy bind with 5 c4 and 7 a3. So now let's look at the final Maroczy bind variation in this video, exploring what to do if 7 a3. a3 intends on stopping bishop b4 from black. However, unlike previous lines, we can just go for our other thematic ideas and play b6. After bishop d3, we play bishop b7, fianchettoing our bishop and attacking the central pawn. f3 is a necessary response to defend the center for white, to which we follow up with the simple bishop e7. After bishop e2, preparing to castle, both sides castle short, and we finish off the line with knight c6. All in all, these Khan-Maroczy bind variations are very systematic and don't require the craziest amount of depth in theory. Of course, you need to be comfortable in these kind of middle games, but the ideas are very obvious and they almost play themselves. The Khan Knight Variation with 5 Knight c3 and 6 Bishop d3. Finally, we need to take a look at one of the more basic approaches white can take to the Khan Sicilian, which is playing the Knight Variation. This occurs after e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, a6, and knight c3. An important characteristic of this position is that the knight now blocks the c-pawn, meaning white cannot advance it. We want to respond to knight c3 with the thematic queen c7, with the idea being to play knight f6 at some stage without allowing e5 from white. It is on this 6th move that white has a few options that we'll look at individually. Let's first look at the most simple line with bishop d3. Although this is the simplest, it's also arguably the best from white, as it's just incredibly solid. In response, we play the thematic knight f6, justifying our move of queen c7. White almost always castles short on the next turn, allowing us to play bishop c5 with tempo on their central knight. This is a theme we looked at previously, where the move bishop d3 obstructs the queen's defense of the knight. White will then play knight b3 to take back the tempo and threaten the strong bishop, to which we just play bishop a7, preserving the bishop on the diagonal, which prevents f4 from coming. Notably, if bishop e3 instead of knight b3, we want to play d6 to ensure that we can play knight c6 without blundering knight takes e6 tactics. However, after bishop a7, white is likely to play king h1 to escape the pin. We should now play d6, anticipating f4 and avoiding a supported e5 advancement. This means once f4 does inevitably come, we play bishop d7, preparing bishop c6, putting a second bishop on a strong diagonal. After a move like queen e1, we do exactly that and plant the bishop on c6. The main thing to note in this variation is we don't want to commit to castling too early. We prioritize our development as white is not threatening to attack down the center. The Khan Knight Variation with 5 knight c3, 6 bishop e3, and 7 bishop d3. We mentioned on the 6th turn in this line, white did not have to play bishop d3, so now let's explore what to do if white plays bishop e3 instead. This is a slight inaccuracy from white, however it does force us to learn a few more lines, so we'll come back to a few variants. After bishop e3, we just want to play knight f6, an extremely thematic move that we've played 100 times before. In response, white has a few moves they can play which we need to look at individually. Bishop d3 is the first try. In this move order, however, white has almost wasted a turn with 6 bishop e3 and allows us the opportunity to play b5. This takes space on the queen side whilst preparing bishop b7. After white castles short, we go ahead and plant the bishop on the b7 square, attacking the e4 pawn. If a move like f3 over defending the e4 pawn, we can actually play the unintuitive bishop d6, which not only develops our bishop but attacks the h7 pawn again. White must respond with h3, to which we just play short castles. In this variation, we haven't achieved anything special, but we certainly have a very exciting position to play here. We should continue by developing our knight to c6 and bring a rook to c8. The Khan Knight Variation with 5 knight c3, 6 bishop e3, and 7 bishop e2. Of course, though, we must come back to the 7th turn and explore what to do if white plays bishop e2 instead of bishop d3. If this occurs, we recycle one of the ideas from a previous line and play the move bishop b4, pinning the knight to the king. It should be obvious the threat is to take the knight and win the pawn. If queen d3, defending, we have the brilliant knight takes e4, sacrificing the knight to deflect the queen. If f3, we have the simple d5, and we're recycling the old idea of hopping the knight into d5. However, the best move for white is just to castle, allowing bishop takes c3 and b takes c3. However, it's important to note that we do not want to take this free pawn yet, as white will have too much counterplay. We first want to play d5, taking the center. After e takes d5, knight takes d5, and c4, we play knight takes e3, and once the knight is recaptured with f takes e3, we castle short. In this line, we know these doubled isolated pawns are permanent targets, so it makes sense to develop our other pieces first before cashing in on the free material, to prevent white from using it as a gambit. The Khan Knight Variation with 5 knight c3, 6 bishop e3, and 7 queen d2. On the 7th move again, white could also try queen d2. This idea is forcing long castles for white. It is not a good idea though. We again play bishop b4, knowing the knight is pinned to the queen and king. This threatens to win the e4 pawn. If bishop d3 defending, we have a long line of d5 attacking the central pawn. E takes d5, knight takes d5 attacking the pinned piece, knight de2, knight takes e3 winning the bishop pair, queen takes e3, and bishop c5 winning a tempo on the queen. White's only way to win tempo back is by playing queen g3 and forcing a queen trade, which we accept with queen takes g3, h takes g3, and knight d7. This This is an endgame we should be better in as we have the bishop pair and the better pawn structure. Although queen g3 forcing queens off the board isn't a likely move, it is the best one, and if the queens stay on the board, we boast the same advantages. Instead of bishop d3 on move 8 though, white can try to play f3, to which we play d5 anyway, attempting to undermine the center. If bishop d3 now, e4 prepares d4, which would fork the pieces. If a3, we just play bishop takes c3, and we've doubled and isolated white's pawn. However, if e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight de2, knight takes e3, and queen takes e3, we just play knight c6, knowing we have a much better position as white's development is absolutely terrible. The Khan-Knight variation with 5 knight c3 and 6 bishop e2. We turn back to the 6th move to continue studying the Khan-Knight variation, by looking at what to do if white plays bishop e2. It must be said, almost any movement of the light square bishop is going to be decent for white, as it prioritizes castling the king, which is an absolute must to keep the advantage for white. In response, we just want to play bishop e7 here as black, although knight f6 is essentially interchangeable. After white castles short, we continue with knight f6, to which will be followed by bishop e3. We're anticipating f4 from white now, which could have also been played instead of bishop e3, but would have been responded to by the same move of d6, preventing e5. When f4 comes anyway, we simply develop our knight with knight c6. You'll notice in all these variations, we often delay castling for as long as possible. We mentioned before that this is to first develop our pieces before making the commitment. But now, essentially regardless of what white will play, we castle short, as our development is essentially completed. So let's put queen e1 on the board, followed by short castles. If king h1, we can play knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and the move that ties everything together, b5. This takes space on the queen side, whilst opening up the b7 square for our bishop to sit on later. The Khan-Knight variation with 5 knight c3 and 6 g3. The final knight variation we need to look at comes with a variant on move 6, where white goes for a Fianchetto structure with 6 g3. This is not a terrible option for white, but it's also not the best. It's also important to note that this will not transpose into the Fianchetto variation, as this is an open Sicilian. We immediately want to punish white for taking one move too long to castle their king by playing bishop b4 and exploiting the pin. After bishop d2, we attack the e4 pawn with knight f6, whilst threatening to remove the defender with the bishop. Bishop g2 is the savior here for white though, justifying the move g3 as the bishop can Fianchetto whilst defending the central pawn. We don't have a continuation here, so we castle short and white should follow suit. We then continue with knight c6, attacking the knight in the center. If white refuses the trade with knight b3, we play bishop e7, f4, d5, e takes d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, and a5. We're down a pawn here, but white's king is wide open and their pieces are not organized to defend it easily. However, if instead of knight b3 they play knight takes c6, we play d takes c6, opening up the central file. A common continuation here is a3, to which we play bishop e7. After queen e2, threatening e5, we actually play e5 ourselves and give the e6 square to our light squared bishop. This position is great to play for black as we've neutralized white's Fianchetto bishop and made great squares for all of our pieces. The Khan modern variation with 5 bishop d3. We must cover one last Khan variation, which is potentially the most boring variation in this entire video, which is the modern. It occurs on move 5, where instead of knight c3 or c4, white plays the immediate bishop d3. Against this, I like to play d5, striking for the center, and after e takes d5, we play queen takes d5. If castles, we play knight c6, knight takes c6, queen takes c6, knight c3, and knight f6. There's not really any theory to this, and we're just playing a very boring systematic position. However, if knight c3, attacking our queen with tempo, we play queen e5 check, bishop e3, knight f6, castles, and bishop b4. Again, there's no real important lines in this position. White will always be ever so slightly better, but there's no real way to prove it unless black starts making bad moves. I think the majority of the advantage comes from the fact that white has a queenside majority and our light squared bishop isn't so great. But once we fix our light squared bishop, these positions are more than fine. The Bowdler Attack with 3 knight c3. If you've reached this point in the video, you can rest easy knowing the Bowdler Attack only occurs in around 1% of games on Lichess. However, we will explore the possibility anyway. It occurs after e4, c5, and bishop c4. In response, keeping consistent with our repertoire, we want to play e6, stopping the bishop from ever having ideas on the f7 square, whilst opening up our own bishop. On the third move, white has a couple of choices, so this is a crossroad we'll come back to. Let's first look at knight c3 as a possibility. In response to this, we want to play a6, stopping the knight from ever hopping into the b5 square, and also preparing b5. If a4 ever comes, stopping our b5 idea, we simply play knight c5 to prevent the move e5 from coming, allowing us to play knight f6 next. However, after the move knight f3, this position actually directly transposes into chapter 20 of the Lichess study, so we have no need to continue looking at this suboptimal line for white and can move on. The Bowdler attack with 3 knight f3. On the third move, instead of the immediate knight c3, the thematic knight f3 is a much better try from white. However, in response to this, we play the identical a6, knowing how powerful the eventual b5 expansion will be. In response, a4 is the likely move, preventing our b5. But now, because there is no knight on c3 defending the central square, we can now push for d5 unopposed. E takes d5 and e takes d5 will follow here. If bishop e2, we play knight f6, and we're in a very untheoretical position where any natural moves for black will be good. However, if bishop a2, we need to play queen e7 check. This move is not only the best, but also plays for a trap. If queen e2, we play knight c6, and the intuitive move for white is to take our queen on e7, as to not forfeit castling rights themselves. However, after queen takes e7, we play the slightly subpar bishop takes e7, to purposely hang our d5 pawn. This is because if bishop takes d5, knight b4 forks c2 and the bishop. After bishop e4, we play f5, bishop d3, and c4 traps the bishop and gives us knight takes c2 check, winning the rook. If castles instead of bishop takes d5 though, we just play knight b4 anyway, threatening the c2 pawn. There is no way for them to defend this pawn, so they'll have to play knight c3, counterattacking our pawn. We follow with knight f6 defending, and white must play the very depressing bishop b1 to hold onto their pawn. Black is clearly better in this position. The Bowdler attack with 3 d3 and 6 knight e2 or knight f3. Moving on, we'll look at the second to last response white can try on the third move, which is the simple d3. This move is very unconfrontational and simply opens up their dark squared bishop while supporting e4. In response, we want to try the similar d5, forcing e takes d5, and bishop b3. We respond to this by developing a piece with knight f6, and now we're at a crossroad of moves where white can play numerous things. Let's come back to this move later, but first we'll look at knight e2 as an option. Knight e2 prepares to castle and allows the knight to reroute to a range of new squares. It must be said that if white plays knight f3 instead of knight e2, we handle the lines in virtually the exact same way. However, in response, we play on the other side of the board with b5 looking to trap the bishop, as if white ignores the threat, c4 wins the bishop. a3 is the most common response, giving the bishop some breathing room, to which we reply with bishop e7, just developing another piece and preparing to castle ourselves. After castles, we just play castles as well, and from here there aren't many intricate lines white can really try to trick us into a bad position. Black will always be better here. If h3, we play knight c6, and after knight b c3, we just play d4, taking the full center with tempo. If knight takes b5, we play a6, trapping the knights as well, and cash in on our abundant control of the game. The Bowdler attack with 3 c3 and 5 bishop b3. For our next two lines, we need to go back to the third move in the Bowdler attack and look at an Alapin hybrid line with c3. The idea here is obviously to strike with d4, but we're one step ahead of white here and come with d5. After e takes d5, and bishop b3, we do not play b5 here because of queen e2 check, but knight c6 instead. After d4, c4 is now a viable resource as it comes with tempo on the bishop, and after bishop c2, we play bishop d6. It's important we continue here because after knight f3, we want to play the odd-looking knight ge7, which will support the bishop getting to f5. For example, after castles, knight bd2, bishop f5 is now possible as the knight supports the square. The Bowdler attack with 3 c3 and 5 bishop b5 check. Rolling back to the fifth move in the Bowdler attack though, what if they play bishop b5 check instead of dropping back to b3? Well, we just block with bishop d7 here. If bishop takes d7 check and knight takes d7, white plays d4, we just play c4 and the structure has transposed into the previous line. However, if instead of d4, white plays knight f3, we play queen e7 check. After queen e2, queen takes e2 check, and king takes e2, we play bishop d6 and play for this endgame. Annoyingly, if we don't trade our pieces like this, our kingside pieces don't get developed in time, and our king gets stuck centrally, which is really unideal. So this position is the best we can really get as black. So now that we've looked at most of the potential lines that you'll play in the Sicilian, it's time to give the opening a rating. Effectiveness. First, let's start off with effectiveness. I am genuinely blown away at how effective the Sicilian defense is, especially compared to what I played before, the Caro-Kann. If you're selective about the lines you play in the Sicilian, you can avoid so many annoyances and build what I would consider the perfect black repertoire. You basically never get stuck in games that look drawish either. Every single line black can play for a win, which can't be said about all openings versus e4, and not only do they not look drawish, if white plays lazy chess, black will just be better. I can't speak for all Sicilians for black, but from the ones I've decided to play in my repertoire, I think it's incredibly effective and intuitive. Overall, the Sicilian defense is going to score very high here. I'm so unbelievably impressed with the effectiveness of this opening, so I'm happy to give it a 9 out of 10. Entertainment value. The Sicilian defense is by far the most entertaining opening I've played with the black side. Although you'll get more exciting lines with a counter gambit of sorts, the Sicilian still offers such dynamic counter-attacking positions that white is often just not prepared to handle. The game treads on such a thin wire for white at all times, so the moment they make a slight misstep, black will always have a great string of moves to swing the game in their favor. There's opposite side castling games, big attacks down the rook files, and fantastic central battles in almost every game you play with this opening. I think the Sicilian defense is easily one of the most entertaining openings in all of chess, so it certainly deserves a rating of at least 9 out of 10. Theoretical difficulty. I actually didn't think the theory for the Sicilian defense was incredibly difficult like some people will lead you to believe. Of course, this is because I actively avoided lines like the knight off or anything ridiculously theoretical, so the theoretical difficulty only applies to this specific repertoire I made. But I feel that by watching the video, you would have caught on to the fact that once you learn the key principles and themes within the responses, you can sort of play on autopilot. There's not a big need to learn 20 moves of theory in every line, as the moves can become so intuitive if you build your Sicilian repertoire properly, and that's certainly the case with this video. It's definitely not as easy as an opening like the Caro-Kann against 1e4, but I genuinely thought an opening like the King's Indian defense was harder to memorize for the black side than the Sicilian defense was. So whilst it must be stated that not all Sicilian repertoires will match this rating, for my specific repertoire I'll give it a 7 out of 10. With that being said, I hope you all enjoyed today's video. I spent around 24 hours studying the Sicilian for this video alone, and another 24 hours writing the 20,000 word script for this video. I also spent another 8 hours recording what you'll actually hear in this video, and I spent lots of money paying the editors that edited this video as well. So if you did enjoy today's video, consider subscribing. A big thank you to ChessMind for sponsoring today's video as well. If you guys want to check out the course for all of the moves in this video, you guys can look at the link in the description below, which will lead you to the ChessMind course that is available for free on their website. All you need to do is create a ChessMind account and you'll have full access to everything. The Lichess studies are also in the description below if you'd like to duplicate the study and add in your own moves as well. Let me know in the comments what you guys would like me to study next, but apart from that, I hope you all enjoyed today's video and I'll see you all in the next one.